Imagine climbing a cliff face 200 feet above a canyon floor. You're using hand-carved footholds. They've been worn smooth by 1,000 years of bare feet. And tucked into the rock, like a secret the earth almost forgot to tell, you find an entire city. Rooms stacked on rooms. Towers reaching toward a sky the color of dried clay. Grain still sitting in stone jars. As if the people who filled them only stepped out for a moment and simply never came back. This is not a fantasy story. This is the real, documented, and still debated history of the Ancestral Puebloans. History once called them the Anasazi. Today, we're walking through every part of their world, their life, their beliefs, and the mystery of why, in the span of a single generation, they walked away from everything they built into the canyons of the American Southwest. Quick note on names, because it matters. The word Anasazi comes from the Navajo language. It roughly means ancient enemies, or ancient ones who are not us. It was never a name these people used for themselves. We don't actually know what they called themselves. So today, archaeologists and their own descendants prefer the term Ancestral Puebloans. That name matters for a reason you'll understand by the end of this video. These people never actually disappeared. Now picture a setting. This is the Colorado Plateau. It's a high desert stretching across what is now the Four Corners region, where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. Elevation here often sits between 5,000 and 7,000 feet. Summers can burn past 100 degrees. Winters bring freezing wind and snow across the mesas. Rainfall is scarce and wildly unpredictable. And yet, for over 1,000 years, people didn't just survive here. They thrived. They built cities of stone. They created stunning art. They traded across thousands of miles. And they engineered water systems that hydrologists still study today. The story starts earlier than most people realize. Long before villages of stone appeared, this region was home to nomadic hunter-gatherers. Archaeologists call them the basket-maker culture. They lived in shallow pit houses, dug partly into the earth, using the soil itself for insulation, warm in winter, cool in summer, and they were master weavers. This is actually where their name comes from. Long before pottery, they wove baskets so tight they could hold water without a single drop leaking through. They wove sandals from yucca fiber. They wove cradle boards for infants. They wove nets for hunting rabbits and birds. Then, something changed everything. These scattered communities began settling down. They started growing maize alongside beans and squash. Farmers today still call these the Three Sisters. Corn, a stalked climb. Beans return nitrogen to the soil that corn uses up, and squash spreads across the ground, blocking weeds and holding in moisture. This was generations of careful experimentation, likely inherited from farming traditions that moved north from Mesoamerica over centuries of trade. As farming took hold, populations grew. So did the architecture. Pit houses evolved into something new, the Pueblo style, which is where we get the modern name. Pueblo is simply the Spanish word for village. Spanish explorers gave it that name in the 1500s, when they found these stone apartment complexes already ancient. Builders stacked sandstone blocks, mortared with adobe mud, 3, 4, even 5 stories high. Rooms connected to rooms. Entire complexes functioned like apartment buildings, centuries before that idea existed in Europe. Nowhere is this more breathtaking than Chaco Canyon, in what is now northwestern New Mexico. Between roughly the years 800 and 1150, Chaco Canyon became the heart of the ancestral Puebloan world. Builders raised what archaeologists call the Great Houses. These were massive, multi-story stone complexes with hundreds of rooms each. The largest was Pueblo Bonito. It stood 4 to 5 stories tall. It held more than 600 rooms. It contained over 30 kivas, round ceremonial chambers used for ritual, gathering, and likely astronomy. Pueblo Bonito remained the largest building in North America until the 1800s. For nearly 1,000 years, the biggest building on this entire continent was built with stone tools. No wheels, no animals, no metal. And Chaco wasn't one building, it was a hub. Dozens of communities connected to it through an extraordinary network of roads. Some ran perfectly straight for over 30 miles. Some cut directly over mesas instead of around them, with staircases carved right into the cliff face. That level of precision suggests careful surveying and deep astronomical knowledge, since many roads align with solstice points on the horizon. Researchers still debate exactly what these roads were for. Trade routes, ceremonial pilgrimage paths, most likely both. Trade is one of the most underrated parts of this story. Archaeologists have found turquoise, mined right here in New Mexico, that traveled as far as central Mexico. It likely reached the Toltec and later Aztec civilizations. In return, Chaco received scarlet macaw feathers and skeletons, birds from tropical regions hundreds of miles south, and they found copper bells and cacao residue inside ceramic vessels. That means people in this high desert canyon were drinking imported chocolate nearly 1,000 years ago. These people were never isolated. They were part of a continental web of trade and culture, stretching deep into Mexico. Now let's talk about daily life, because this is where the humanity really shows. Evidence points to a matrilineal society. Lineage and home ownership passed down through the mother's line. Women likely the homes. They managed food stores. They played a central role in deciding when to plant and harvest. Men often handled hunting, long-distance trade, and construction, though the lines weren't always rigid. Children learned survival skills almost as soon as they could walk. Young girls learned to grind corn using a metate, a flat stone slab, and a mano, a smaller handheld stone. This task was so constant and so physically demanding that archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have found distinctive wear patterns on the knees and lower spine of Puebloan women. Thousands of hours spent kneeling, grinding corn into meal. Young boys learned to track animals and identify edible plants. Eventually, they joined hunting parties for rabbit, deer, and bighorn sheep, using bows that gradually replaced the older spear thrower, called an atlatl, sometime around the 6th or 7th century. Clothing came mainly from cotton, grown by the Puebloans themselves in warmer lowland areas. They also used yucca fiber and animal hide for cold weather footwear. In dry caves, archaeologists have found turkey feather blankets, woven with astonishing skill. Some blankets contain feathers from over 100 turkeys, twisted around a cord of yucca fiber, warm and surprisingly soft. Turkeys were domesticated, kept mainly for feathers, and possibly ceremonial use. Dogs were domesticated too, for hunting and companionship. Pottery is another window into their world, and it evolved dramatically. Early pottery was plain gray-brown clay, used for storage and cooking. But by the 10th and 11th centuries, potters, almost certainly women, were producing stunning black-on-white pottery. Intricate geometric patterns, spirals, stepped designs representing clouds or mountains. Some researchers believe these patterns encoded clan symbols or origin stories, passed down through generations. Different regions developed distinct styles. That lets modern archaeologists trace ancient trade routes just by following where certain pottery shows up. Religion sat at the absolute center of Puebloan life. Much of what we know comes from comparing these ruins with the living traditions of modern Pueblo peoples, who maintain strong oral histories connecting directly to these sites. The kiva, that round underground chamber, represented an entry point to the earth itself. Many Pueblo origin stories describe humanity emerging from an underworld through a small hole in the kiva floor called a sipapapu. Ceremonies here likely marked the changing seasons, guided the young into adulthood, and prayed for rain in a land that always needed more of it. Astronomy wasn't separate from religion here. It was into it completely. At a place called Fajada Butte, near Chaco Canyon, sits one of the most famous discoveries in North American archaeology. It's called the Sun Dagger. 3 sandstone slabs let sunlight filter through in narrow beams, falling onto a spiral carved into the rock behind them. On the summer solstice, a single dagger of light pierces straight through the spiral's center. On the winter solstice, 2 daggers of light frame its edges perfectly. This was intentional, precise, repeated. It let priests or astronomer leaders track the solar year with real accuracy. That knowledge was essential for timing planting seasons in a place where guessing wrong meant starvation. Now here's where the story turns. Around the year 1150, Chaco Canyon's influence began to fade. The great building projects slowed, then stopped. Power shifted north to a new center, Mesa Verde, in what is now southwestern Colorado. And here we find some of the most famous and haunting sites in this entire history. Around the year 1190, in a dramatic shift, the people of Mesa Verde abandoned their mesa-top villages. They moved into the cliffs themselves. Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling in North America, was carved into a natural alcove under an overhanging sandstone cliff. It held around 150 rooms and over 20 kivas, home to roughly 100 people. Nearby, Balcony House and Spruce Tree House show the same pattern. Entire communities tucked into rock, reachable only by narrow hand-and-toe trails carved straight into vertical stone. Why move into cliffs after centuries of building in open, easy-to-reach places? This question has fueled debate for generations. Some researchers point to defense. Rising conflict over shrinking resources made these hard-to-reach places a matter of survival. Others point to environment. The alcoves stayed cooler in summer and captured winter sun exactly when it was needed most. Most likely, it was both, working together at a moment when life on the plateau had become far more dangerous than it had been in Chaco's golden years. And that danger had a clear cause, one that modern science has now confirmed in detail. Tree ring analysis, a science called dendrochronology, lets researchers reconstruct year-by-year climate by studying growth rings in ancient timber. This data reveals that starting around 1150 and getting worse through the 1200s, the Southwest was gripped by what climatologists now call the Great Drought, a multi-decade dry period hitting hardest between roughly 1276 and 1299. Corn yields, the entire foundation of Puebloan survival, would have collapsed. Skeletal remains from this final period show rising signs of malnutrition and stress markers in bone and teeth, and disturbingly, growing evidence of violence. In a small number of heavily studied and still debated sites, some researchers see signs of extreme conflict during periods of famine. This remains one of the most sensitive topics in southwestern archaeology, and scholars still disagree on how widespread it was. But one thing isn't disputed: resources ran out and desperate times followed. So when exactly did the Great Migration happen, and who figured it out? Thanks to that same tree ring science, we know the timeline with unusual precision. The last securely dated construction timber at Mesa Verde was cut around the year 1281. By roughly the year 1300, there's almost no evidence of continued population in the core Four Corners region. Within 1 to 2 generations, an area that had supported tens of thousands of people for centuries was essentially empty. As for who discovered these cities in the modern era, here's the honest answer: they were never truly lost. Local indigenous peoples, the Navajo, the Ute, and the Pueblo descendants themselves, always knew these places existed. They held them as sacred ancestral sites. What changed was Western awareness. In December of the year 1888, 2 Colorado ranchers, Richard Wetherill and Charlie Mason, were tracking cattle through the Mesa Verde canyons during a snowstorm. Across the canyon gorge, they spotted the towering stone walls of what they'd later name Cliff Palace. Wetherill went on to explore and excavate sites across the region in the years that followed, including major work at Pueblo Bonito in the 1890s. Public and scientific interest exploded. In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed legislation creating Mesa Verde National Park. It became the very first national park in the United States created to preserve human-built structures rather than a natural landscape. Chaco Canyon later became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. So why does this story matter today? Because the Ancestral Puebloans were never a people who vanished into mystery. No matter how documentaries love to frame it that way, they didn't disappear. They adapted, exactly like their ancestors had adapted to this unforgiving land for centuries before. When Chaco's power faded, they moved to Mesa Verde. When the Great Drought made the Four Corners unlivable, they migrated south and east. They carried their farming knowledge, their traditions, their pottery skills, and their oral histories with them, into the river valleys along the Rio Grande, into the mesas of northern Arizona. Their direct descendants live there today. The Hopi villages of Arizona, some of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America, and the 19 Pueblo communities of New Mexico, including Acoma, Zuni, and Taos, who still hold ceremonial connections to Chaco and Mesa Verde as sacred ancestral ground. What the Ancestral Puebloans really teach us is a story about the outer limits of human adaptation. They took one of the driest, harshest, most unpredictable places on this continent, and out of stone, mud, corn, and community, they built cities that stood taller and lasted longer than almost anything else built here before European contact. They read the stars to plant their fields. They wove baskets tight enough to hold water. They built roads across deserts that still puzzle engineers today. And when the climate itself turned against them in a way no skill or devotion could overcome, they didn't collapse into extinction. They folded their world into a new one. They carried forward everything that mattered. And their descendants are still telling that story in their own words, in their own villages right now. The canyons are quiet now. The great houses stand roofless, open to the sky. But the people who built them never really left. They just walked a little further south. And still here,